What's up everybody, welcome back to my channel. I am John from firstrebreathe.co.uk and today we are looking at the genioglossus muscle. We're looking at sleep apnea, we're looking at how to improve sleep apnea and improve your sleeping overall. So we're diving into some very interesting stuff. What we're going to do is look at this paper which is just come out this month, and it's looking at these things: sleep apnea, the genioglossus muscle, and dispelling some myths we have around sleep apnea. As you may or may not know, about 85% of the UK actually suffer with some kind of sleep apnea, and we know that there's about 1.5 million that only actually get treatment. So this is a big problem here in the UK, and it all leads down to your respiratory system. We know that if you have poor broken sleep because of sleep apnea, this leads to other problems in your body and your biology. So to stop those knock-on effects, make sure we recover properly, which are obviously great for training, injury prevention, all that other stuff in terms of athletic performance. We want to make sure we get a good night of sleep, and we want to make sure that we are getting over any sleep apnea or sleeping problems we may have, light or serious. So what this study is looking at is kind of dispelling some of the old myths that we believe in, that when we have arousal events, what plays a role in that arousal event. And generally, we believed it was the arousal event occurs so then you can re-engage the respiratory system and go back to sleep. So you need to have that arousal for the respiratory system to then sink back in and for you to get back to sleep. But actually, what we're looking at here in this paper is that there might be more reliance on other muscular groups than the respiratory system itself, which is actually very interesting. Before we get into what that muscle is, make sure that to understand that when we do have arousal events, this is often because we need to improve ventilation of the respiratory system. This ventilation is very important to get the right amount and optimal blood gas exchange for us as human beings. But this can sometimes overshoot and we can put ourselves into hypercapnic states. Hypercapnic means low CO2 in the blood. These low CO2 in the blood can lead to further collapsing of the airways, because CO2 is a great vasodilator. It's great for opening up those airways. So we know that sleep and sleep apnea events, that arousal can actually sometimes lead to further collapses, which is why we have such broken sleep and maybe multiple sleep apnea events over one night period, which can obviously lead to poor recovery, poor sleep, as well as other worse health effects thereafter. So what we're looking at here is the genioglossus muscle, which sits at the bottom of your chin here, just underneath your tongue, and helps you move that tongue, which is going to be important later on, so remember that. The genioglossus muscle is a muscle group of the face. It is not to do with the respiratory system. Obviously, it aids in the respiratory system, but what's interesting with the genioglossus muscle is after an apnea event, after arousal, it actually stays active for up to 7 breaths more than it did before the event. So it shows that there's an engagement of this muscle group after an arousal event. And the reason why this is because the genioglossus muscle is a great muscle group for preventing further collapse. It helps move the tongue away from the back of the throat and keeps those airways clear so that you can continue to breathe whilst you sleep. So this is very interesting. This muscle group actually stays active and increases its activity after the arousal event for up to 7 breaths. The reason why this is also very interesting is because it works in hypercapnic states. So because it works in hypercapnic states when there's low CO2, it's aiding with the opening of the airways to counteract that closing from hypercapnic states. So this paper highlights something very interesting at this point, which is why I'm doing this video, to highlight this point, is that there seems to be a disconnect of units here at this point when we've had a sleep apnea event. What do I mean by disconnect of units? So the hyperglossus nerve and the phrenic nerve. The hyperglossus nerve obviously moves glossus muscle groups like the genioglossus muscle group, and the phrenic nerve moves things like the respiratory system, i.e. the diaphragm, and it has a few different roles in moving the diaphragm and also helping the brain to sense where the diaphragm is in the rib cage. So because we see this increased activity of the genioglossus 7 breaths after the arousal event, what this tends to indicate is that there's a disconnect at this point, that the phrenic nerve and the genioglossus nerve disconnect in their communication. The phrenic nerve tries to re-establish breathing from the diaphragm and the respiratory system. The hyperglossus muscle, then the hyperglossus nerve, should I say, then goes to the genioglossus muscle to move out of the way of the airways and expand those airways again. even after the apnea event. Does that make sense? Do you understand what I'm trying to say here? That when you breathe, you miss a breath, you snore, you wake up, and then you go back to sleep. And then once you've gone back to sleep, you might be in a more of a hypercapnic state. There might be more of a collapse of the airways, which could lead to further events. So then the muscle group disconnects from this breathing apparatus and then tries to move the muscles so that you can open the airways up and keep sleeping rather than having another sleeping event, sleeping disturbance. So this is very interesting because there's lots of debate about which takes over where these neurons are activating from, where it's getting this from. But it's very interesting that this could be the unlock for some people, that the genioglossus muscle, training these facial muscle groups, can actually help with sleep apnea events. So how do you train the genioglossus muscle? Well, it's in your mouth. It's not an easy muscle to train. You can't lift weights with it. But what you can do is you can use good tongue posture. Good tongue posture being mouth closed, tongue to the roof of the mouth the whole time. Whenever you're not talking, when you're working, thinking, reading, writing, whatever you're doing, walking, keep the mouth closed with the tongue to the roof of the mouth. This helps engage those muscle groups. There are obviously other exercises you can do, so make sure to follow me on the socials and you'll see those crop up from time to time. Or comment below if you want me to do a video on just how you can train the genioglossus muscle a bit better to stop sleep apnea events. But there's the one thing to understand is good tongue posture will lead to good exercise of these muscle groups and engagement of these muscle groups for things like sleep apnea events. How we sleep, generally our baseline breathing is what we go to when we're unconscious. So if we train good conscious habits, this should lead to good unconscious habits when we sleep. I hope you found this video very interesting. I certainly did, and this is why I wanted to bring it to you guys. I hope you like it. Make sure to give that like below. It's the best indicator for YouTube to get this out there to other people that suffer with sleep apnea. There's 85% of the population of the UK we need to get this video out to. So let's support ourselves and our community by getting this kind of content out there. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I'll see you all again very soon.